The first thing Ty Farrell did when he arrived on an alien planet was check his hair. He pressed 2 fingers to his temple, smoothed the wave above his left ear, and glanced around at the smoking crater. His arrival had punched into the red soil of wherever the hell it was. The transport beam, he refused to call it a teleporter because that was a word for things that were real, had deposited him on his knees in front of a small crowd of people who were staring at him the way you stare at a preacher who's just fallen off the pulpit, with hope and embarrassment in roughly equal measure. "Captain Zoom," said a boy, no older than 12, stepping forward from the front of the group. He had enormous eyes and a jaw set with a determination that looked borrowed from someone 30 years older. "You came." Ty got to his feet. His left knee throbbed. The broadcast had been doing its 3rd season when he blew out that knee on the studio backlot, and ever since, it clicked when the weather changed, or apparently, when someone with a homemade dimensional array kidnapped him from his own dressing room. "Son," I said carefully, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. I am not." "He said he's not going to give us the speech yet," the boy announced to the crowd. "He's testing us. Captain Zoom always tests the people he's going to help, to see if they're worth saving." A murmur went through the assembled Pangeans. Somewhere near the back, someone began to clap. Ty closed his mouth. This was, he would later reflect, the first of many moments on Pangea where telling the truth turned out to be completely useless. His name was Tyrone Farrell. He was 34 years old. A graduate of the Callaway School of Performance, a Screen Actors Guild member in good standing, and the 3rd highest-rated children's television's entertainer in the Pacific Northwest market 3 years running. He played Captain Zoom, a straight-backed, silver-suited spaceman with a jawline like a cliff edge and a moral compass that never deviated for 42 minutes every Saturday morning. He did it with a kind of professional commitment that he privately felt went underappreciated. The writers gave him lines like, "Justice has no expiration date, Zarkon," and he delivered them without a flicker of irony, because that was what the job required. He was good at the job. He was not the job. He tried to explain this 3 separate times in the first hour. Boy's name was Kale. His sister was Tyra, leader of the Pangean resistance, was currently imprisoned in the citadel of Lord Vox of Vestron, and had been for 11 days. Kale had built the dimensional array from memory, referencing every episode of the broadcast he'd received and re-received, until he understood the physics of Earth's television transmission well enough to reverse it. He was 12. Ty didn't know whether to be impressed or furious, and ultimately settled on both. "Your device pulled me out of my dressing room," Ty said, as they walked through what appeared to be a partially subterranean village, architecture carved directly into a red rock plateau. "I was in a bathrobe. You were conserving your strength," Kale said. "I was having a cup of coffee before the mission." "There is no mission." "Captain Zoom," said Kale, and he said it with such plain, undecorated certainty, not arguing, not pushing, just stating a fact about the universe the way you'd state that water was wet. "My sister is in. Lord Vox has had 11 of our people executed. He's going to destroy the wells in the southern valley, and then our people will have nothing. We don't have time for the test to go on much longer." Ty stopped walking. Around him, the village continued its quiet preparations. People sharpening tools that looked like they were made for farming, but were being repurposed for something else, wrapping supplies in watertight skins, exchanging words in low voices. "How many of you are there?" he asked. "Enough," Kale said. "Not enough." Ty looked at the boy for a long moment. The kid had the kind of face that didn't ask for pity. That was almost the worst part of it. "I need to understand the layout of this citadel," Ty said at last. Not because he was going to help, because knowing the layout of a problem was the first step toward finding a way out of it for himself. That was the reason. That was the only reason. Kale smiled. It was a small smile, carefully restrained. The smile of someone who has been hoping for a very long time and has learned not to let run loose. "I'll show you everything," the boy said. The high priestess of Pangea was named Sagan, and she was the only person in the village who looked at Ty without any particular reverence. She was old in the way that certain things are old, not diminished but concentrated, like the mineral deposits that accumulate in stone over centuries. She wore robes the color of the red rock plateau, and she watched him with quiet, diagnostic eyes. "You're afraid," she said. It was not an accusation. "I'm out of my depth," Tai said. They were sitting in a carved alcove off the main tunnel, a small fire between them fed by something that smelled faintly of pine. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "Fear is about what might happen. Being out of your depth is about what's happening right now." Sagan seemed to find this interesting. She tilted her head slightly. "And which is worse?" "Right now, being out of my depth." He turned his cup. It was shaped like a bowl, earthenware, warm between his palms. "Fear at least implies a future." She studied him in silence for a moment. Then she said, "You were chosen because the transmissions showed us a man who never stopped, faced things larger than himself, and found always a way through. Not over, not around, through." "That's a writer named Dale Hapscom," Tai said. "He makes 40,000 a year to think those things up. I say them. There's a difference there too." "And yet," Sagan said, "here you are." He didn't have an answer for that. He drank his tea instead. It tasted like the smell of rain on dry earth, which was the kind of taste that shouldn't be possible, but somehow was, out here, on a planet that had never heard of the Pacific Northwest. Vox of Vestron was a problem. Tai learned this from the reconnaissance map Kale had drawn. Detailed, precise, labeled in both Pangean script and, touchingly, phonetic English. And from the 3 resistance fighters who debriefed him that evening in the main planning room. The Vestrans had arrived on Pangea 2 generations ago. They were a people who had, according to Sagan, once belonged to this soil, had, in some ancient unrecorded era, departed for the stars and built themselves an empire in the leaving. Now they had come back. Not as returning children, as inheritors who had decided the current occupants were squatters. Laurel's Vox was the architecture of that attitude made physical. By every account, and the accounts were vivid, delivered with the specific details that only come from people who have personally experienced a thing. He was patient, methodical, and entirely without the kind of cruelty that loses control of itself. The worst kind. The kind that doesn't get bored. He had imprisoned Tyra, not because she was a symbolic trophy, but because she knew where the old wells were. And the old wells led to tunnels. And the tunnels were mapped in the indigenous collective memory that Vox nodded to unlock in order to do whatever it was he intended to do with the planet's core. He thinks the ancient knowledge of our people is a key. One of the resistance fighters, a broad woman named Dara whose left arm ended just below the elbow, said. He thinks if he can extract it, he can rebuild the old seat of power. He doesn't understand that it's not a key. It's a relationship. You can't extract a relationship. What does he do? Tai asked carefully. When he realizes that. A silence. He destroys the thing he was trying to use, Dara said. Because that's what Vox does when something doesn't give him what he wants. Tai nodded, slowly. He was doing the thing he'd learned to do in table reads when the script wasn't making sense yet. Holding the pieces without, forcing them together, letting the shape of the problem surface on its own. Tyra, he said. She's the only one who knows the full map? She is the map, Kale said from the corner. He'd been quiet for so long Tai had almost forgotten he was there. She spent her whole life learning it. It's in her body, not in a book. So as long as she doesn't give it to him, she won't. She's been in there 11 days. She won't, Kale said again. The same uncomplicated certainty. The same refusal to dress it up or defend it. Tai looked at the boy. Then he looked at the map. Then he looked at his own hands, which were an actor's hands, used to gesture and grip and open wide for emphasis in medium shots, and thought about what kind of hands they would need to be tonight. He went over the layout 4 times. He did it the way he'd memorized scripts. Not word by word, but by the logic of the scene, cause and effect, the what happens if. He asked questions that the resistance fighters answered with increasing surprise, because the questions were not heroic. They were technical. Where does the guard rotation overlap? How long between the change? What's the material of the door? Is there flex in it? Is there light in the holding corridor, or do they use none? Where does water flow in from, and where does it drain out? He wasn't planning a rescue. He was learning a set. And once you knew a set, you knew how to move through it without being seen. That, at least, was something Ty Farrell knew how to do. They went in at the 4th hour of the night cycle. Ty wore borrowed clothes, dark, close-fitting, Nothing like the silver broadcast suit that he privately thought made him look like a theater prop. He carried a tool that Kale had pressed into his hands at the last moment, something that looked like a wrench that had made bad life choices, but functioned, apparently, as an electromagnetic disruptor. "Don't point it at your own face," Kale said. Ty had not felt it necessary to be told this. The entry point was a drainage channel, just wide enough for a human body moving sideways, just deep enough to smell like something geological and unpleasant. Dara led them in. Two resistance fighters named Kor and Sevi followed. T came last because he had negotiated this. Point position required instincts built over years of experience, and Dara had those. Rear position required someone who could improvise if the plan fell apart, and that, whether he liked it or not, was him. The channel opened into a service corridor. The light was exactly what he'd predicted, none, except at junctions. A bioluminescent fixture gave out something between orange and nothing. The floor was stone. Sound carried. He moved the way he'd learned to move for the fight sequences in Season 2, when the choreographer had told him, "The camera doesn't want to see you thinking. It wants to see you having already thought. So you work it out in advance, and then you let your body know the answer before your brain does." He'd thought it was pretentious at the time. It turned out to be good advice. They were halfway to the holding level when the guard rotation changed 20 minutes early. Ty felt the change before he heard it. A shift in the air pressure of the corridor, a sound like boots on stone arriving at the wrong time, pressed flat against the wall, and held up a closed fist, which was, apparently, a universal signal for stop, because everyone stopped. 3 guards. Vestron, which meant a biology that overlapped with human in broad strokes. Upright, bilateral, roughly the same scale, but diverged sharply in the details. Their sensory organs were distributed differently. They didn't rely on forward-facing eyes the way humans did. They read the space around them in a kind of distributed awareness that was less like sight and more like pressure. Ty knew this because Kale had told him, and because he'd spent 20 minutes watching footage, crude recordings on, purposed equipment, of how Vestron patrols moved through corridors. They swept wide. They caught things in peripheral awareness. They were almost impossible to hide from using conventional concealment. Almost. He'd asked Dara, during planning, whether the Vestron's distributed sensory system had any gaps. She'd said, yes, at the center, dead directly ahead, because the distribution assumes threat from the margins. No predator on their homeworld had ever attacked from straight in front. It was a gap so anatomical they didn't know it was there. "Don't hide," Ty murmured to Dara, just his lips, no breath behind it. Walk toward them. Center line, steady, a beat. He felt her hesitation. "Trust me on this one," he said. Was possibly the most absurd thing he'd said since arriving on this planet, and the bar was high. She walked out, centered, steady. Ty followed. The others followed Ty. The guards passed them at a distance of perhaps 4 meters. They did not register. Their awareness slid past the group, the way water slides around a stone that has always been there. Nobody breathed until the guards were around the corner. Dara turned and looked at Ty with an expression he recognized. The specific look someone gives you when you've done something they don't fully understand but can't argue with the results of. Season 2, Episode 8, he said quietly. The Vestibule of Zarkon. The villain thinks he's got Zoom cornered because all the exits are covered. Dale Hapscom figured out that the straight ahead was always open. I just asked him how he'd come up with it. He paused. He said he'd read a paper on predator cognition. Writers are underrated. They reached Tyra on the 3rd level. She was not what Ty had expected, though he wasn't entirely sure what he'd expected. Someone diminished, perhaps. 11 days in a Vestron holding facility, without her people, without daylight, knowing what Vox was capable of. But the woman who looked up from the corner of the cell when the lock came open was not diminished. She was sharp-edged and contained, the way people get when they've been burning low for a long time and have learned to conserve. She looked at Ty, then at Dara, then back at Ty. "Who's this?" she said. "Captain Zoom," said Kale, who had appeared. Ty still wasn't certain how the boy moved so quietly, at his elbow. Tyra looked at her brother for a moment, then back at Ty. "You're the television person." "I'm T. Farrell," he said. "I'm an actor from Earth." Your brother pulled me out of my dressing room with a machine he built from the signal of my television show. Tyra absorbed this. Did it work? I'm here, aren't I? She almost smiled. It moved through her face quickly like a fish breaking the surface of still water, there and gone. Can you get us out of here? We're working on it, Ty said. The route back should have been clean. It wasn't clean. The early guard rotation change meant the overlap had shifted upstream, and the corridor they'd used coming in was now occupied. Core reported this in a whisper from the junction point, and the group reconvened at a maintenance alcove that smelled of machine oil and structural minerals. Secondary route, Dara said. It wasn't a question. Secondary route goes through the command wing, Tyra said. She had oriented to the map Kale showed her in seconds. She really did know this structure like she knew her own body. Vox will be there. This hour? Always. He doesn't sleep the way we do. Short cycles, distributed. He'll be there. A silence in the alcove. Then we don't go through the command wing, Ty said. We go through the floor. Everyone looked at him. The drainage channel we came in on. Where does it connect laterally? Not below, laterally. Kale was already working through the map in his memory. His eyes went slightly unfocused in the way of someone reading a text that only they could see. There's a junction on this level. Service access. It runs to an exterior vent on the north face. What's the north face look like from outside? Rock, Tyra said. The citadel is built into the plateau. The north face drops about 12 meters to the plateau floor. 12 meters of rock face. Can it be climbed? Down, Tyra said, in the dark. Can it be climbed? Ty said again. By someone who knows what they're doing, Dara said slowly. Then the person who knows what they're doing goes first, Ty said. And everyone else follows and does exactly what their hands tell them to do. Thinking about it, because thinking about it is the part that gets you killed. He paused. I had a choreographer tell me that once. About something considerably less dangerous. Tyra looked at him with the particular expression of someone recalibrating. You're not very much like the show, she said. No, he agreed. But you're not nothing either. He didn't answer that. He turned to the drainage junction instead. The 12 meters of rock face was, objectively, one of the worst 12 meters Ty Farrell had ever experienced, and he had once done a live broadcast with a malfunctioning jetpack harness. Rock was cold. The dark was complete except for the faint planetary luminescence from the sky above. Pangea had 2 moons, one of which was currently up, providing just enough light to register shapes without providing enough to be useful about it. His hands found holds by feel. His shoes, borrowed, slightly too large, kept sliding on the mineral face. 3 meters down, his left knee clicked loudly enough that he was certain every Vestron in the Citadel had heard it. None of them fell. That was the thing he would remember. Not the 12 meters, not the cold, not the awful moment when his right hand found nothing for 2 full seconds, and his body went through everything fear knows how to do in 2 seconds. What he would remember was that none of them fell, and when they reached the plateau floor and stood breathing in the dark, Dara pressed his arm once, just once, briefly, her right hand on his bicep, and said nothing, and that was enough. They were 200 meters from the outer edge of Vox's perimeter when the lights came up. Not sunrise, it was nowhere near dawn. The lights came up from the Citadel sweeping. Search pattern, someone had found the cell. Run, Ty said, which was at that point, genuinely the full extent of his strategic thinking. They ran. The perimeter, it turned out, was less a wall and more an assumption trick, a line at which Vestran authority expected resistance to stop. What it was not designed for was a group of people who simply kept going. 'Cause the assumption embedded in every perimeter is that the people inside know they're contained. The moment you stop believing in the wall changes shape. They crossed it. On the other seat, barely, with the first sweep of searchlights scorching the rock face 30 meters. Behind them, they reached the edge of the plateau and the canyon cut that led down to the valley and the village. Tyra took the lead without discussion. She knew this terrain the way she knew the tunnels. Her feet found the path before her eyes did. Ty ran third in line and saw around the second switchback, winded, his knee clicking with every step, the silver broadcast suit he wasn't wearing, somehow very present in his mind. He started to laugh. It was quiet, he didn't have the breath for loud, but it was real. Kale, just ahead of him, glanced back. "What?" the boy said. "Nothing," Tai said. "Keep moving." But the thing was, he knew Q at some level he couldn't quite articulate. That, whatever Dale Hapscomb had written across 42 episodes of Saturday morning televisions, was not entirely fabricated. The things that worked. The dead center approach, through the distributed sense blind spot. The floor instead of corridor redirect. The run as the final plan when all other plans expire. Those things worked because somebody, somewhere, had noticed something true about the universe and put it in a script. And he'd memorized the scripts well enough that the truth in them was available to him when he needed it. He wasn't Captain Zoom, but he zooms lines, and sometimes on a 12-meter rock face in the dark on an alien planet, knowing the lines was the thing you had. The village prepared through the night. Not for a final battle, Tai had been clear about that. A final battle was a fantasy. The Vestrans' superior numbers, superior technology, and Lord Vox's particular brand of patient, methodical brutality on their side. A battle was a way to lose slowly and with dignity, and dignity was cold comfort. What Tai proposed was something different. He'd been turning it over since the drainage channel, since the moment when Tyra had said, he knows where the tunnels go, and Dara had said, you can't extract a relationship. Fox wanted the knowledge that lived in Tyra's body. The mapped memory of Pangea's underground architecture. The ancient wells, the channels, chambers that the original Pangean people had built, and the Vestrans had forgotten existed when they left for the stars. He believed it was a key. He believed it would unlock the seat of power. What if, instead of hiding that knowledge, you let it be used? Not by Vox, but directed, shaped, the way a channel shapes water. Not stopping it, but determining where it goes. Sagan had listened to this, in silence, in the carved alcove, pine-smelling fire between them. Then she had said, the Guardian. Tai had said, tell me about the Guardian. Sagan told him took an hour. He listened to all of it. He asked 3 questions. Then he sat for a long time with his cup, which was cold by then, and turned the shape of the plan over in his mind, until it stopped being a gamble and started being a choreography. The hard part was getting Vox to come to them. The harder part was that this turned out to be easy. Vestrans, Dara explained, had a specific cultural vulnerability to what she called the open challenge. It wasn't honor in the human sense. It wasn't about pride or reputation. It was structural. An open challenge in Vestran culture was a claim that the challenger had something the challenged party needed. Ignoring it meant admitting you didn't need it. Vox, who had built his entire authority on the premise that Pangea had something he needed, did not ignore it. They sent Naira back. Not surrendered. Not captive. She walked back to the Citadel in the late afternoon, alone, with a message that Captain Zoom of Earth challenged Lord Vox of Vestran to receive, in person, the knowledge he had been seeking at the place of the first well, at sundown. Tai spent the afternoon in the deepest part of the village tunnels with Sagan and 2 of the oldest Pangeans, learning the sequence. Not memorizing, he was past the point where memorization was sufficient. He was embodying it, the way he'd been trained to embody a character, until the lines weren't lines anymore, but simply the things that this person in this situation would say. Vox arrived at the place of the first well with 40 soldiers. This was, Tai thought, a reasonable number to bring to something you intended to control. It was also, given the specific geography of the first well and the tunnels beneath it. The tunnels that Tyra had been mapping since childhood, the tunnels that opened in 17 different directions under the plateau, the tunnels that the Vestrans had never known were there, an irrelevant number. The first well was a circle of cut stone, waist-high, ancient, smooth from centuries of hands. Around it, the plateau opened into a natural amphitheater, red rock rising on 3 sides, the valley visible through the 4th. The light at sundown was the kind of light that turns everything the color of old copper, deep, angled, making shadows out of ordinary things. Tai stood at the well. He was wearing the silver suit. He had not wanted to wear it. It was theatrical. It was absurd. And it fit imperfectly because the resistant seamstress had reproduced it from memory of the broadcast and had made the shoulders too wide and the collar too high. But Kale had asked, and Sagan had said quietly, that symbols matter more than the things they symbolize, because symbols are what people can hold on to. So he wore the suit. He squared his shoulders. They were narrow enough for the oversized collar to accommodate and he stood at the first well. And when Lord Vox of Vestron walked into the amphitheater at the head of 40 soldiers, Ty Farrell looked at him with the expression he'd spent 3 seasons perfecting. Calm, unhurried, the expression of a person who has already decided how this ends. Vox was impressive, in the way that things built for power are impressive. He was tall by Vestron standards, which put him just over Ty's height, and he moved with the specific economy of someone who has never had to rush. His face was patterned. Vestron facial articulation worked differently from human, more distributed, more mobile in the bone rather than the surface, and his eyes were the dull amber color of deep water. Actor, Vox said, not Captain Zoom actor. A deliberate reduction. Lord Vox, Ty said, long way to come for something your people left behind. My people built what was here. We have the right to reclaim it. What your people built, Ty said. They built with the people who were here. You can't separate them. Sagan tried to tell me that the first night. Took me a while to understand what she meant. He paused. You've been trying to pull the knowledge out of Tyra, like it's a splinter. But it's not a splinter. It's the whole body. You can't extract it without extracting her. And if you extract her, it's gone. You've been in a closed loop for 11 days. Vox was quiet. Something moved in his amber eyes. Not emotion exactly, but calculation. So you're offering it, Vox said. I'm offering something better than what you were going to take, Ty said. Which is the demonstration of what this place actually is. He looked at Tyra, who stood at the edge of the amphitheater. She gave him the smallest nod. He turned back to Vox. The knowledge your people took with them when they left, Ty said, was incomplete. They took the map, but not the territory. The territory has a guardian. And the guardian doesn't respond to force. Not because it can't, but because force isn't the key. Relationship is the key. Your people forgot that, because when you build an empire, you stop needing to be in relationship with anything. You just take. Vox said. A demonstration, Ty said. He reached into the well, not far, just past the rim, to where Sagan had shown him. In the dark of the tunnel an hour ago, that the carved sequence lay. His fingers found the sequence by feel, pressed it in order. Not quickly, not with drama. The way you open a door that's been yours to open for a long time. The ground moved. Not violently. Not as collapse or quake. The kind of movement that belongs to something enormous waking from a long sleep. Measured, purposeful. Accompanied by a sound below the range of hearing that Ty felt in his sternum. The walls of the amphitheater opened. Not broke. Opened. As if they had always been designed to do this. As if the red rock had been waiting. The tunnels beneath the plateau, all 17 directions of them, exhaled. Light came up from below, something bioluminescent and very old. A blue-green that had no equivalent in anything Ty had ever seen, coating the walls of the revealed passages in a glow that made the copper sunset garish. In the center of the well, water rose. And in the water, something moved that Ty was not going to try to describe, because he had no language for it, and because some things are better left at the edge of understanding. What he could say was that it looked at Vox, and Vox looked at it, and Vox understood, with the specific clarity that comes to people in the moment, before something completely reorders their understanding of the world, that he had been operating on a wrong assumption for a very long time. The Vestrans had left Pangea because of a catastrophe. They had built an empire in the stars. They had returned to reclaim what they believed was theirs. But what they had left behind was not a resource. It was a covenant. Planet itself. The wells, the tunnels, the guardian that lived in the deep places, was not a seat of power waiting to be reclaimed. It was a living relationship between the people who had tended it and the land that had allowed itself to be tended. Could not inherit a relationship you had abandoned. You could only start over. That was what the guardian said, not in language, because it didn't use language, but in the specific restructuring of Vox's ambitions that Ty watched happen across the Vestran Lord's face over the space of about 30 seconds. It was, Ty thought, the most genuinely dramatic thing he'd ever witnessed, and he'd been in entertainment for 13 years. Vox turned to stone. That was how Sagan described it afterward. The Guardian's judgment. An ancient sentence for an ancient offense, reformatted for a contemporary violator. It was not death, precisely. Sagan was careful about that. It was more like the Guardian had pressed pause. Vox would, she thought, eventually be released. When the understanding reached the right depth, she estimated this would take some time. His 40 soldiers, for their part, stood for a long moment in the amphitheater, and then, with the particular practical efficiency of people who have just watched their commanding officer become a geological feature, began to re-evaluate their situation. Dara and the resistance negotiated from a position of considerable strength. In the days after, and there were days, because the veterans needed to be settled, and there were things to rebuild, and the wells needed to be tended, and all of this took time. Kale found Ty at the edge of the plateau at dawn, sitting on the rim with his feet hanging over the drop and his coffee substitute cooling in his borrowed bowl. "You could stay," Kale said. "I don't belong here," Ty said. "You said that when you arrived. I still mean it. The difference is now I'm saying it without trying to get you to send me home in the next 10 minutes. Kale sat beside him. They were quiet for a while. Below, the valley was filling with the slow morning activity of a settlement that had stopped bracing for destruction and was figuring out what it looked like to just live. "The show," Kale said. "Does it keep going?" "Season 4 is being filmed right now," Ty said. "Somebody's playing me on set. Probably doing a better job of it, frankly. Will you tell them? What happened here? Who would believe me?" "Children who watch the show," Kale said. "They'd believe you." Ty looked at the boy. The enormous eyes, the borrowed determination, the 12-year-old who had built a dimensional array from television physics and had been entirely correct about what he'd find on the other end of it. "Maybe," Ty said. "The stories travel," Kale said. "Your broadcasts, they came across all that distance and they reached us and we thought they real, and then we made them real. Maybe that happens everywhere. Maybe somewhere else. Someone is watching and building the device to come find you." Ty thought about this. "That's terrifying," he said. "Yes," Kale agreed, with obvious satisfaction. The device that sent Ty home was slightly more refined than the one that had brought him. Kale had spent the intervening days making adjustments, and the departure was gentler, a kind of dissolving rather than a violent subtraction. Just before the sequence completed, just before the red rock and the 2 moons, and the blue-green light of the wells blinked out, Ty did something he hadn't planned to do. He squared his shoulders. He set his jaw. He looked directly at Kale and Tyra and Sagan and Dara and Kor and Sevi and all the assembled people of Pangea who had come to see him off. And he raised one hand, palm out the way Captain Zoom did at the end of every broadcast. He held it for a moment. Then he was in his dressing room, in his bathrobe, with his coffee on the counter. The coffee was cold. He stood in the dressing room for a long time. The mirror gave him back his own face. The face of a 34-year-old actor from the Pacific Northwest. Time, winner of the Regional Children's Entertainer Award, member of SAG, with a knee that clicked when the weather changed. He picked up the coffee. He drank it cold. Then he sat down at the dressing table and found a legal pad and a pen, 'cause someone needed to write the Season 4 finale, and Dale Hapscomb had taken a vacation, and Ty Farrell had some very specific notes about how a story like this was supposed to end. Not with a battle, not with a villain vanquished in fire and triumph, with a sequence, pressed in order in the dark, by a person who had learned that the right action at the right moment is something you have to put in your body before you need it. With water rising, with light coming up from below, with something so old it had forgotten being young, looking at the people who had come back and asking, "You ready now?" He wrote until the studio lights came on for morning blocking. He wrote through the script supervisor's knock on the door and the second AD's increasingly impatient radio calls. He wrote with the specific calm of someone who has recently been on a 12-meter rock face in the dark and has decided that a blank page comparison is nothing to be afraid of. At the top of the first page, he wrote a title. Then he crossed it out. Captain Zoom didn't need a title. The audience already knew the show. He just needed to get the ending right.